This is the Persons of Interest podcast, diving into careers, personal stories, life lessons, and more, featuring interviews with interesting people doing interesting things. And now, here's your host, Derek Dockett.
Persons of Interest podcast with an episode I've been wanting to do for a very long time. I consider myself a graphic designer to the stars because of relationships, and I'm thinking this guy may give me the most freelance work of them all. You tend to have a project for me like at least once a month, I feel.
I think in my phone, my wife will say, "Who are you texting?" I'll say, D-Bear. It's like, "Who's D-Bear?" I'm like, "My graphics guy." "What are you working on?" I'm like, "I don't know." I usually have, what happens is I'll have an idea for a segment on radio or podcast, and I'm like, I always want them to have their own look or their own logo. And you're the man. You are the man. You create them quickly, and it's just, I love your work. But we go way back before I tapped into your graphic excellence.
That is the voice of Mark Kilcoyne, the sports director at the 2 Fox, as I now call it as well, going back to the very first sports talk show that I started listening to. You may not know this story. So in 2004, I think you guys came on the air for the morning grind in the summer of 2004. I started listening in the fall of 2004. I'd never listened to sports talk before that. I just came back. So this is...
And that barely qualified as sports talk, I think.
True.
To be fair.
True. Sad thing, my big brother had just passed away. I was on a leave. And my first day back, I didn't want to listen to music. I was like turning the dial, and I'm like, I need something different to listen to in my commute, which wasn't a very long commute. But I stumbled on, I don't even know what the conversation was, but I remember Coach Kennedy. I don't know if you remember that story, the guy that would call in high school sports. You guys would humor him, but then when he'd hang up, you'd turn the tails on him. But it was,
I don't remember. It's amazing how many historians are out there from the morning grind. And McKernan and Hayes and I'm like, when was that? Did we do that? That name sounds familiar. But was he scolding us to do more high school coverage?
A little bit, but he'd always just give his tidbits, and you guys would say, "What do you got this week?" And you're like, "All right, that's your update from."
I love the random callers. I miss that about radio.
That's when I first started listening, and I was hooked. Like, it was different, and it was what I needed, and I've been hooked ever since on that kind of like conversational talk. And I'm just wondering, like, were you doing like that kind of radio prior to that?
So I'd been working at Fox 2 since 97. And in my TV career, I would sit in on shows, FM shows. I worked in Madison, Wisconsin. I had worked in Rhinelander, Flagstaff. Didn't do a lot of radio. But when I did, it seems to me it was always like a morning show that wasn't necessarily sports talk. But in St. Louis, for a little while, Joel Goldberg and I did a show called The Foxhole. It was on 1380. But it was a sports show, but Joel and I, we had known each other since Rhinelander, so we would just kind of jack around a little bit, and I'd fill in at 590. And then when the new ownership group came in from Atlanta, Big League Broadcasting, they interviewed like everybody in town, and you would go and have this meeting, and they were tough and cool, as all long since discussed. I didn't know these guys at all, and there was a whole group of people like Cusimano, McKernan, who were already working there. So, but they were bringing in, they were looking for new talent, whatever you want to call it. And I remember meeting with them because Brian Burwell had talked to him. He had done a lot of TV, radio, everything in the past. And Brian and I were friends, and we were doing TV segments together.
Okay.
So I went in there under the premise, Burwell and I were going to do a show, 10 to noon or noon to 2 or whatever. And I went in and I said, it'd be great. I've known Brian a long time, and he knows everybody, and I have fun with it. So I basically went in on this interview thinking I was going to do a show with Brian Burwell. And I don't remember if it was in that meeting or later, and they called, and they said, what do you think about mornings? And I'm like, what time? With who? And I knew Hayes, and I knew McKernan, but none of us were like best buddies. It was kind of a arranged marriage. And I'm like, I guess. And they did say in the meeting, and I remember it being complimented, they said, everybody that has come in here has trashed everybody else in town. They said, everybody sitting in that seat talked bleep on other people. and they said, "You're the one guy everybody said something good about," and they didn't know me.
Okay.
So they're just kind of taking notes. Who's in town? Who should we meet? And they said everybody recommended you. So long story short, they said, "How about if you guys team up?" And then they came up with the name, The Morning Grind, and we said, "That is the dumbest name." And they're like, "Remember, like coffee. You're having coffee, like the morning grind, and it's a drive at work, and you're grinding." That's the voice of Evan Crocker, who I really liked. He was the GM. But we all thought it was so stupid. But years later, it was unique. And the name actually, it just fit. It really did.
Yeah. It was a great run that I hated to see come to an end in 2006. I don't need to go into that. I know the background. I think
it's been well told, I would say.
It has been. I could pull some of the TMA and some of the other audio clips and insert it in for the benefit of those that may want to know that. But I love it. I still listen to Hayes' show on 590 now. I still listen to TMA. I listen to your stuff with Danny Mac, the stuff on 550, not just because I do your designs, but because I'm interested, because I love hearing the conversations, because they're just not like the straight, you guys have fun with it. And that's what I appreciate.
I've never been a guy, and I would tell them in meetings, whenever I've been interviewed for jobs, I said, I'm not going to break down the Falcons front seven.
Right.
I'm not in stats has taken over sports and fantasy sports. I've never been that interested in as a kid, I memorized the batting averages. I could tell you what Richie Zisk was hitting in Texas. But so I grew up, love of sports, stats is connected to it. But I think now it's so overdone.
Yeah.
And I just lose interest, and it's mind-numbing. I'd rather have some guy sitting here and say, "Oh, yeah, man, when I was playing in Toledo, I punched out a bartender and I got suspended." I'm like, that's way more interesting than tell me if you're developing a curve change ball this year. I just don't care about any of that.
Well, plus for you probably do so much of that with your full-time job on TV. You cover the team.
But even on TV, I'm not a big stats guy. I've worked with guys who would be live in the field and they would spit out, "Hey, the Cardinals have won 10 of their last 11 games on Tuesdays, but overall they have a winning percentage against the Astros. The pitcher tonight is his latest ERA." And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Just give me a sense of, hey, the team's in the tank, or they just had a players-only meeting, or just more information than stats to me is not information. That's just, it's static and it's boring.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't make for good audio listening. There's a place for it, but it's not for me. So
yeah, there's a lot of sports radio, and to me, it's all formula. It's fine. People enjoy it. It obviously works. But when it's the old joke for TMA and the morning grind, got to be better at teasing. This idea that you always know what you're going to get into next is so stupid. And you're telling me, it's like how baseball is scripted now with the pitchers.
Yeah.
I can't stand that. You don't know in the 6th or 7th inning who should be pitching because you don't know what the first guy is doing. But if you're going to decide at 6 a.m. or at noon, okay, in that third segment, we'll break down the Blues power play. Well, what if something interesting happened? What if Craig Counsell gets hired by the Cubs? The idea that you're going to just script a show to me is stupid. And it forces people to say things. They're not only dumb, it's almost disingenuous. When we come back, we'll tell you how the Blues will beat the Falcons, or the Blues will beat the Blackhawks.
Yeah.
Obviously not playing the Falcons, and I kind of hear, and I love Randy Carricker, but I hear him in my voice because he's good at teasing, but it's usually topics that I'm sure he doesn't know. Coming up, we'll tell you why the Cardinals will add a free agent pitcher. Well, you don't really know that for sure, do you? It's just a formula that I can't stand.
Yeah. Before I move off,
coming up, I will likely interrupt D-Bear. That I can promise.
Before I move off the Morning Guy, I've got to ask, and I'm always curious from your perspective. I've listened, like I said, since 2004. But when someone brings up the Morning Grind, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
To my mind?
Yeah.
Probably ask Tony, because there was so much LaRussa stuff, and that took on a life of its own also.
Type of first.
Type of all the isms. And I still text with him, and he still texts with these same Tony isms. I think of that. It was a fun run, for sure. I'm amazed how many people felt like a connection to that show and still talk about it. But I guess, what are you, about 40?
I'm 43.
Yeah. So people that were 20, 22, 23 that didn't want to have traditional sports radio, it kind of connected with them. Had I stayed, I think that show, and it's done great. CMA has said Doug Vaughn is awesome, and he was the perfect guy to come into that show. But I think the Morning Grind would still be going. It would be wildly popular. And, ideally a show like that, the mix is going to be news of the day. Hey, the Cardinals did win, or hey, Pujols hit a walk-off home. Or you're going to talk about that stuff for sure. But hey, guess who's on the phone? It's Edmonds. He's driving to his workout, or it's, Mozeliak agreed to come on because everybody listens, or, a show where, and I've always liked being on shows where people want to be a guest.
Yeah.
That's what and even now when I'm doing at 550, we get the people primarily we want to have on because they trust that it's not going to be run of the mill, or that they also trust that I'm not going to take a cheap shot. I mean, I might make a joke about Kachuk's weight or something, but I mean, for the most part, it's hopefully enjoyable for them.
Yeah.
You don't want to have a guest on that's like, oh God, I have to do this. It's I said yes, but I didn't want to.
Right.
And if I text somebody, hey, you want to do the show? And they're like, maybe next week. And then you text again. They're like, I don't know. And then I'm like, I let it go because you don't want somebody on that doesn't want to be on. And I do think where we were at the Morning Grind at its height, I think people probably wanted to be a guest on that show.
Yeah, it was.
Although if it got a little risque, and poor Larry Plow, the GM of the Blues, is really buttoned up. And okay, guys, talk hockey, talk Kachuk to this day still. It's like, okay, talk hockey, which is a Plow-ism.
One of my favorite segments, and this will be my last Morning Grind thing because I didn't want to make this a Morning Grind retrospective. One of my favorite segments.
Because then you'd get sued by Buck Swope, right? For copyright infringement.
Right. One of my favorite segments will always be, I had no idea. I don't remember you mentioning it on the air, but the next morning you guys started the show and you just went into this deep Blues talk. And it was just Blues and Rangers tonight. Puck dropped at 7.
Yeah.
What do you got? That goals against, it was just like
straight
hardcore
sports, yep.
hockey talk. And it was just so hilarious because you obviously knew you guys were just making it up. But then you said, hey, we had dinner with Blues
Mark Sauer.
Yeah. And they said, talk hockey, guys, talk hockey.
Right. Well, he basically said, and Mark's a fascinating guy, and I need to get him back on the show. He ran the Cardinals, he ran the Pirates, and then he later ran the Blues. And I think I had him on radio or podcast like 2 years ago. And I was asking him about all these difficult decisions because he had to get rid of Barry Bonds in Pittsburgh. And then with the Cardinals, the brewery was involved. And he said, Martin, is this one of those interviews where you're talking around you take up a hatchet, man? Is that what I am? Like, and we have fun with it.
Right.
So he was a really well-known executive, straightforward, but he said, I'm going to take you guys to Morton's. And so we go to dinner and he brings the PR guy. He said, you guys, it's morning drive. Okay. You should be talking Blues. And if you know Sauer, he's very direct. From New York, but he's interesting. And he's like, you can't just do grab ass Hayes all morning. Come on, Hayes, you have a respectable job. And Kilcoyne, you kind of do too. So you guys, why don't you talk some more? He said, kind of browbeat us a little bit while serving a steak, which is not all that stupid. So we kind of collectively decided we would like mock it, of course, and then pretend like we were diehard Blues guys. And then we shifted after 10 or 15 minutes and kind of said, hey, we had this dinner and we don't really give a shit about the Blues or whatever. And he texted me because I think he was listening. He said, you guys are assholes. I was like, because I think he wanted to see, did it take?
Right.
And I still talk to him all the time. He's interesting, but he tried. And people always say, the media can be bought. I'm like, you really think like Derek Gould or Bernie Miklasz, if their opinion changes, if they get a free hot dog at a Cardinals game, you guys won't speak out because then you don't get free hot dogs. I'm like, it really doesn't change people's lives if you get free hot dogs, you know? So I think it was a noble attempt. I don't even think it was the Blues were in like a down period there. It must have been after the lockout. I can't remember, but they were definitely about to sell or had sold or whatever. And I think he was just trying. It was also a measure of respect because he thought we had an audience. So he wanted us to play ball, and we didn't.
Yeah, it was fun. So you talked about something in your early days, and I work from home now. We talked about before I started recording.
T-Bear's usually running like 30 miles for lunch.
I'm running after we get done.
Okay.
Here. So
how many miles are we running today?
I'm hoping just to do about, I say hoping because it's so nice out.
Right.
I tend to sort of do it based on how I feel. I'm going to try and keep it under 6 because I'm wanting to do 13 at some point, either Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. So I need to lighten the miles in the front end of the week. So it's because
your body, you're a lean, mean fight machine. Is your body giving you any pushback on running?
No, honestly.
Because I used to be a runner, believe it or not. And people are like, you did? And I'm like, I love it because I like a good sweat. But now I'm like, it's too hard on my body. It is. I need to walk more.
So shoes have been the game changer for me. And varying my distances have been the game changer. So I don't always do 3 miles. I'll do 3, 6, 4, And, but the shoes have been like the key. And rest days, like I didn't run yesterday. I did run Saturday. I did 8 miles on Sunday. So it's not an everyday thing.
Okay.
I will say since the half marathon that I did the first weekend of October, my miles have gone up because I was strictly training. And I think now I sort of got back into, I'm going to crank out the miles, and I really shouldn't do that. But I feel good. So we'll see. Like I said, I don't have a half marathon. I'm running a turkey trot at Family Arena on Thanksgiving, and then a race in early December at Forest Park. And that's what I've got on the calendar for the rest of the year. So
okay,
you're the person that gives me the most trouble, I think, about my running.
I'm jealous, is what it is.
So no, it's you know what, I've felt as good as I've felt in a while, and it was more along the lines of at one point, like in 2017, 2018, I played basketball with some buddies, and they said, nah, we're getting a little older, and I don't want to. I'm tired. And then we didn't have a place to play. And I'm like, I need something to do. So I started going to Creve Coeur and walking. And then the walking became, I think I can run a mile. And then run a mile became, I think I can get around this whole park in, X amount of time. And then became, I think I could run 30 straight minutes. And that became, I think I could do a 5K. And 5K, 30 minutes became my baseline and just took off from there.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, you look healthy.
Thanks. I appreciate it. So you alluded to something when you're outlining your radio background.
Oh my! He's pulling out a compact disc.
I am, and I found this. So I don't know the chronological order of every place you've been. I know you've had stints at House 590, 1380, 550. Everywhere in between.
Right. I always used to make fun of. I said I don't want my resume to look like Baldwin's, Hardballs, or Slate. These guys have all been at each station like 8 times. They're like, wait a minute. I kind of became that guy. The Foxhole. You have a collection, December 07 to March 08. And this was my second Foxhole with Maurice Drummond.
Correct.
And Chris Pelican, who I just saw recently. Oh my. Foxhole. April. Yes, Foxhole. These are some CDs of the Foxhole, I love that show because the mayor, Mo Drummond, and I are good buddies.
With Iggy. I think Iggy was your
there. Yes. Well, that's the loose term for producer. I've told many stories, repeated many stories. A couple of my favorites. Maurice knew Dan Patrick from ESPN. Maurice had been a production assistant years earlier, so we got Dan Patrick on the show. And he's great. He's funny, and we're talking and having so much fun. And he finally said, do you guys have any commercials? And we're like, what? No, we don't. We got a couple, but no, we don't. To keep going. And then Mo and I did a segment. For some reason, we were riffing about Jim Nance and the sacred sod. And 1380 was located on the landing. Mm-hmm. And it was above a Show Me's, and it always smelled like grease cooking. And there was literally not a porn shop, but like a lingerie, dirty, racy kind of thing downstairs. Because I remember Dick Ford came on the show, the retired newsman. He said, you didn't tell me there was a smut shop downstairs. So we always kind of made fun of our location. And we were doing a Jim Nance bit, and somehow Mo and I got into the sacred sod of Laclede's Landing and, turn left at the homeless guy. We did this whole thing. I thought it was pretty funny. And we go to the break, and I said to Iggy, can you clip that off for me? I don't save anything. That was fun. I would love to just save that. And he said, hey, buddy. Yeah, I wasn't recording. I was on the phone. What happened? I'm like, we just did this hilarious. Yeah, just do it again next segment. I'm like, do it again? What do you mean do it again? So, yes, Iggy was the producer of that Foxhole. The previous Foxhole with Joel,
right?
Which the original 1380, he was on like the Bolivar
in the city,
really in the city, and like in an upstairs
Kings Highway,
middle of nowhere, kind of. And it was almost out of a closet. It was not fancy. One of my favorite stories, and Joel and I think Mike Martz was on like 10 times that spring because I was at the time we were pretty close. And I'm like, there's no station in America that has this access to an NFL head coach that probably has like 50 listeners. But at winter warm-up that year, the Cardinals had signed Joe Girardi. And I went up to him and I said, hey, would you come on the radio show? And I asked for his number, and he said, why don't you give me the call-in number and I'll call in. So I said, sure. So I scribble it out and I totally forget about it. It's like 2 months later on the board, it's like callers, Baby O, and who else would call and all that? And then it said Joe. So we go, Joe, how you doing? He's like, yeah, hey guys, it's Joe Girardi. I'm like, Joe Girardi. I'm like, really? And he's like, well, one of you guys, didn't you give me a card at the warm-up? And I said, oh my God. I said, you are a man. I totally. So we're like just taking calls, and Joe Girardi happened to be one of our random callers. It was a noble act by him. But yeah, that was the first Foxhole.
Yeah, well, I wanted to share this because I feel like of the shows post-morning grind, you've had many, and for some reason, the relationships for you tend to, they extend. Specifically, I don't know how or why, and I'm going back to your event you had with Mike Martz. That was one that sort of evolved over time, even after you became a coach. You've done these events, and they seem to maintain. Tony Russo, you've done segments and podcasts with him. What do you contribute to maintaining those relationships even after these guys retire from their sport and they keep going, and you pull them in to do shows like the Tony Talk podcast that you had? That was one of my favorites, because to hear him open up about things, current, not current, past, whatever it was pretty sweet. Like, those weren't things you get, because Tony's a really interesting guy. We all know as Cardinal fans here, and you were able to pull some interesting nuggets out of him.
Yeah, I thought those segments, and the good thing about it, that's going back. So 2019 was the first year, and everybody was kind of starting the podcast world. And I was like, I was still doing regular daily radio at 590, but I kind of wanted to get into podcasting. And I think the reason is not just because everybody does it. I wanted to go a little longer form.
Right.
And typically in radio, you got to get to a break. You got to get to traffic. You got to get to weather, commercial break, all of that. And I think as a listener, sometimes it feels disruptive.
Yeah.
And that's why I do love the current show on 550. It's nightly from 6 to 7. And when we talked about doing it to kind of kick off their sports night every night, and they said you could have on, LaRussa or Deerdorf or, Lutz, from S City SC or whatever. And I said, if we do this, I think it should sound a little more like a podcast.
Yeah.
And so they really have lessened the breaks, and the segments are longer. I think Joe Buck was the first one, because every sports guy, when he gets a new show, you interview Joe first. And then the next day you interview the channel.
I haven't had Joe Buck on my podcast
yet. Okay, well, we'll put him on the list. And I think we went 30 minutes, and he told these stories about how he was scared going to Monday night, and he wasn't sure if it was the right move. And it just opened up. Which is what you originally talked about. So I love the podcast format, and I'm appreciative at 550 that we're doing that now on a nightly basis. Had a guest last Thursday, and I don't want to just do sports. And I say that, and then I look at my lineup, and it's almost always a sports guest, because that's primarily who I know.
Yeah.
But I'm open to, I want to get somebody from St. Louis City, from the economic development wing, because I see all these, we always hear downtown sucks, right? Downtown's terrible. I keep seeing all these buildings going up that are like condos, lofts, apartments. I'm like, something's moving down here. There obviously is like a younger movement, younger than me and you, that are interested in being. Top Golf wouldn't be building that thing if the people weren't going. So I'm fascinated by that. So I want to find somebody from the city. But I had a guest last week, a publicist, PR lady, Jane Higgins. I've known her for years. She said, I got this guy, I want him on your show because you'll do a good job with him. And his name is Fizzle. And I said, any relation to the Dizzle? Rob D? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Fizzle. He's a Christian rapper.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with Christian rap. His name is Travis Tyler, but for many years he was Fizzle. So he comes on the show. I literally met him walking in the studio, and we record the show during the day. Ideally, they're in person like this. It's better. But if they have to be over the phone, you do it. Typically, the phone, you don't go as long because it's not as personal. So he comes in, and he couldn't be more interesting. He's talking about growing up in the city of St. Louis, selling drugs when he was 12.
Wow.
And that's how he survived. And when you open the fridge, there's nothing but cockroaches. And he goes, I needed money. And, blah. His story, it's like when we watched The Wire, and you saw these kids hustling drugs when they were like 8, 9, 10. And he told me, he goes, that's what it was like.
Wow.
And this is in our backyard. And he tells how he got out by doing Christian rap. And now he's trying to get to kids. He said, you can't, when they're 15 and they've got a gun in their car jacket, he said, it's too late. So I'm trying to get them when they're 9, 10, 11 and get them on the right path. Fascinating guy. Nothing to do with sports. Although I found out later he and Wainwright had connected, which if I'd known would have been a fascinating topic. But people had texted in the show that night and said, we don't take texts because it's recorded. It's not interactive. Said, this guy's unbelievable. Who is this guy? And then the next day on McGraw-Millhaven show, a caller called in and said, I don't know if you guys all heard this. You got to find out more about this guy. So it had a life of its own, but it was because it was interesting and conversational. Now with LaRousse, and so that's the whole interest in podcasting, interest in that format. And I think that's why people are so taken by it and why so many podcasts are successful. People just want to hear conversation. So when LaRousse and I did it, we were at a good point when he retired. There were times he wasn't, I would say we weren't warm and fuzzy.
Okay.
Same with Mike Barnes. By the time he got fired, we were not on good terms. And actually that stems from really my morning grind work, because we got real sarcastic and I learned a lesson there, because he and I had become friendly. My wife and I, when we were dating, I think our first official date was at his house at a party. And I was like, oh, she'll be so impressed. I go, we're going to a party at Mike Martz. And she said, no, who's that? I said, he's the head coach of the Rams. And she didn't say, no, who are they? But she's not a sports fan. So we go to this party, middle of the summer in 2003. And we walk in and I said, holy crap. I go, that's Stan Musial playing the harmonica. She said, Stan Musial, I've heard of him. And I'm like, thank you. So we had gotten close, and I crossed the line by being too sarcastic, too rude. And I do feel bad about that. I've told him that. But now he lives here. He moved back after all these years. He's got kids here, grandkids here too. And so we did the event in January. It was so much fun. And we wanted it to be this intimate setting where he told stories, no microphone. It was perfect. Tony, he's always kind of respected my sarcasm and jokes. And since he retired, he'll come on the show every once in a while. And I think recently, a good measure of respect, he came on the radio show. It was the first time he talked about his cancer. Now, he doesn't say specifically what he had, but he had just been cleared after a year of chemo. And on the show, he said, I decided, you can either feel sorry for yourself or attack it. And we know Tony is almost psychotic about competition. He kind of decided he was going after cancer. And right after that, he was back in town. He had lost some of his hair and it was white. And he looked, like he'd been through chemo. But I love the fact he came on the show and felt comfortable talking about that. I texted him the other day when Bobby Knight died, because they were extremely close.
Absolutely.
So I think mostly, again, Martz would probably say there was a time Martin was not one of my favorites. And there's still a little awkwardness, I think, because he feels like I burned him a little bit. And I was kind of an ass. I mean, I was trying to be funny. And every once in a while, you get burned. I remember Steven Jackson stopped me during a training camp, and he said, hey, I was watching you last night, and I didn't think that was that funny. And I was, what did I say? This is always dangerous. And I think we had a clip where he said, hey, this year I'm going to rush for 2,000 yards or something extreme or whatever. And, good for him. And I think we came out of it, and I said, good luck with that. And I didn't even mean to be. He took it wrong. And I said, Steven, you're a lot like me. I said, we both talk too much, and we try to be, fun or interesting. And then sometimes, and I go, if I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry. And I said, go do it or whatever. And then they went 1-15 or whatever. But mostly, other than offending people at times and trying too hard, if the joke, sometimes you got to cross the line and you can burn people. But I think to your main point, it is about relationships. And I would say my best example is Marshall Faulk, who is a tough nut to crack. He didn't really like dealing with the media. I got paired with him because the station, I had just been named sports director, and they hired him to do Sunday night TV. They had just won the Super Bowl. And I said to my bosses, I said, he's not real friendly. But they said he agreed to do it. And so on Sunday nights, he would come into the station and he'd get there 2 minutes before the show. Sometimes he walked in during the beginning of the show. And I thought to myself, and I was just promoted to replace Pete Peterson, who had been the main guy. So I thought, this is really uncomfortable. Nobody in town knows who I am. They may be mad the other guy's not here. And now they put me with a guy who's not going to play ball. And Marshall's a pro. So he might sit down in the break and I'd be like, hey, how you doing? Fine. Hey, a good game. But when the red light came on, he was great.
Yeah.
Broke down the game. He's super smart. Interesting. They were good segments. He was good TV. Well, by the end of the year, we're in the breaks. Hey, Mark, man, don't ask me about this, but did you see that one, telling me stuff? Because he trusted me. It took a while. He's one of those guys you got to. And at one point, I don't know where we were. I think he filled in the spring. He did nightly sports. I wish I was good at archiving, because all this stuff would be interesting with the YouTube world now. Yeah. He did the sports at night. Hey, I'm Marshall with your nightly sports. The Blues played.
I don't remember that at all.
It was 2 or 3 nights. And I helped them produce, and I was in this room, and I'd say, here's what they're going to do next. It was a rating stunt, but he wanted to get better at TV, and so he did this. So this couple of the producers, Jarrett and Dave, did all this work, editing and scripts and printed everything. And so at the end of a couple of nights, I said, you should take these guys out to dinner. You should. And he's like, why? I said, why? I said, because you're a millionaire and they busted their ass for you. And he's okay. So we all went to the Portobello's in Clayton. It was like a Wednesday night at 11. And I think he called over to Del Pietro or somebody, hey, man, I'm bringing a gang, stay open or what. So about 7, 8 of us, because I went in the newsroom and I said, Marshall said, if you guys want to go, there were news producers going, I'm going. And we had a big table and he paid for it and drove his Ferrari and it was fun. But he said in front of the whole group there, he goes, man, you know what I like about Martin is he never tries to like be your buddy and hang out and call me to hang out. And I said, I don't want to be your friend. And he goes, yes, you do. And I said, no, I don't. I got lots of friends. And he goes, yeah, but deep down, you kind of want to hang out. And I go, no, I don't. I really like, what are we going to do? We're not going to hang out. But he said, Martin's never burned me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that's cool. And so longest answer you'll ever get on Person of Interest, episode 492.
I think you're 63.
Okay.
Maybe
but
60,
I think the answer is, yeah, if they trust. That's the number one thing. Strickland has a great podcast with Cam Jansen.
Yes.
And I'm not a big hockey aficionado, but they get these guys to say not outlandish things, but honest things.
Yeah.
Criticisms or whatever it is, because they have a good rapport. They make people feel comfortable. Yeah. And that's, I'll tell you another podcast, and TV guys, radio guys love to talk. You can't stop them. But that's the beauty of we're not up against a break. Take a break. During the pandemic, desperate for content on the TV side.
Yeah.
There's no games going on. What do you do? And as I look back, I kind of remembered this and that, but I was trying to come up with this interview segments via Zoom, of course. And I got Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee to do one together because I said, Willie on his own won't do it. But I said, and the two of them were funny and we had the triple box thing going and Ozzie starts making fun of Willie. It was great TV and it worked because of them. So then I was like, well, what's the next? Who could I pair together? So I texted Bob Costas and I said, I have this idea because you and Dan Dierdorf were paired on sports radio. Dan was still playing for the football Cardinals. Bob was a young sports host. And they put him on Sports Open Line on KMOX. And it took off. It was popular. And it was a thing. And then Bob goes to network TV. Dan goes to network TV. But it launched, I think, both of them. So I said, I've got this idea. I'll have the two of you together. And we'll just solely talk about how that worked and what you guys liked about it. And Bob wrote me back. And he said, Martin, I really like you. And I love Dan. And I have no interest in this topic. I said, okay, fair enough. And Bob is a total pro, though. Yeah. About a week or two later, he calls me. I want to let you know by way of full explanation, because his diction's perfect. His delivery's perfect. This is just a phone call, and he sounds so professional. I said, your pal Cusimano has gotten to me for this Michael Jordan documentary, I forget the last name.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, I've agreed to do an interview because I was on the call for that game in Utah. And he said, I didn't want you to think I was blowing you off. And I said, Bob, trust me, I'm a sports guy during COVID. I said, I'm throwing a million things. I go, you were just one of 10 to dust me off. So then about a year later, I said, Bob, I got another one because he likes specific angles. And it's a great point for everybody because he said, I don't want to just have the Tulsa sports guy or Des Moines sports call and say, hey, Bob, remember that time at Syracuse? And remember that one time? And he's like, is this the Wikipedia interview where you go from start to finish? So it's a great point. And I said, I want to do one on the art of the interview because he had an interview show that he loved called Later. I think Bob's a really good interview among many things. So I said, I just want to talk specifically about interview styles. Mike Wallace is going to grill you. And you know that when you sit down on 60 Minutes, famously, he would go after people. I said, Letterman would get stuff out of people, but he wasn't a great interview. He was having conversation.
Right.
So we did a podcast, and I'm proud of it. If you go listen now, it would still be interesting. And he texted after, he said, that was really fun, really enjoyable, because we got into what does it mean to be a good interviewer? And I said, Howard Stern gets people to open up in his own way, very different styles. So in the course of that segment, Bob tells a funny story because he's hosting the NBA Finals in Chicago, and Jack Nicholson showed up. And I think I asked him on his later show, is there anybody you couldn't get? Because he had big guests. It was late at night, but he was well respected, and they would get big names to come to New York. And I think Jack Nicholson doesn't do TV. If you think about it, you've never seen him.
Good point.
On The Tonight Show, you've never seen. He thinks it's beneath him as a Hollywood star. It's interesting. So now Bob says, I know all of this, but my producer at the NBA Finals says Nicholson's at the game in the United Center or Chicago Stadium, wherever it was with the Bulls. And they said, see if he'll do a halftime hit. And Bob said, are you kidding me? And I felt good knowing we all get asked to do things by our bosses we don't want to do. And like, if Bob had to go do something that he didn't want to do, I feel better. So he said, I walk up, I get to Jack Nicholson. This is probably in late 90s or something. And he said, I tap him on the shoulder. He said, and Nicholson turns around and says, Bobby, how are you? And he said, Jack, I know this is a fool's errand, but is there any chance you'd want to join us? And he said, Bobby, you seem like a good kid. You do a nice job. You tell those people, no way. It was a hilarious story. I'd never heard Bob use the F word either, but it was just repeating what Nicholson had said. And it was just so much fun because that was the course of a 20, 30-minute interview.
Yeah.
We're just talking like you and I are.
Yeah.
And people, we're finding out, I think people crave that.
Yes, I agree. That's what's led me to do mine, which started just as people learning about people, what they do and why they do it, and it turning into inspiring others of, oh, well, that's it. Like, they're human. That's it. You're humanizing people.
Well, and person of interest could be, the teacher you had in fourth grade.
Right.
It could be the guy that you see every day at the delicatessen who runs it. He's been here for 50 years. Sometimes the biggest names are the worst guests.
Right.
And you'll spend all your time trying to book the biggest name, and then they're kind of a dud. And you're like, who's really interesting was my neighbor who I didn't know had been in Vietnam or whatever.
Yeah.
You could, and Rich Gould on his Sunday night sports show, we worked together for many years, and I would say, Rich, who do you got this week? He's like, well, I was trying to do something on the Blues, and they never called me back, but I would have my neighbor on. And I'm like, okay. And he said, well, you know why? Because my neighbor is the best damn fisherman you'd ever heard talking about. Okay. And he would have fun with whoever he brought on the show. Yeah. And subsequently, I've had Rich on my radio show a bunch too, just to tell stories.
Yeah, well, Rich, he's one of my favorites.
Storyteller and laid back. He's writing children's books and country music songs. And
I knew the country music. I didn't know the
he's written some children's books. He's trying to he's 100% serious about it too. I know it sounds like a bit, but it's not. So he is a person of interest.
All right.
And he loves the Valley.
Yeah, I did know that.
He used to live in Branson. He did a reverse Beverly Hillbillies. He grew up in like Orange County, California. He was going to Angels games when he was a kid. And then his family moved to the Boot Heel or to the Branson area as a kid.
Don't hear anybody going that way often. I got two more things for you if I let you go. So
this is impressive. You don't have a list, but you know you have two more things for a number of reasons.
A 2-pound carrot cake. I just know things I just want to pick your brain about.
We're live at the MAC, by the way, the Missouri Athletic Club, if you hear a little clattering in the back.
And I think I'm setting you up with Danny, man. I listened to Great Talk, and I know you guys are doing a remote the next time you do Great Talk.
We're talking about that. Well, Dan comes here.
Is this a test drive?
Oh, that's a good point. No, I've recorded a lot of interviews here because there's a number of different little nooks and crannies where you can just kind of sit and they won't bother you. We're not in a formal studio here. We're drinking coffee at the MAC.
Yeah. So I am curious. I know that Steve Savard, Mike Bush, they've all made that switch from the sports guy to the news guy and still doing it. I know you're pretty much, I don't think you're looking to do that. I don't think you have any interest in doing that. Yeah. But I'm curious to know why stick in St. Louis? I feel like you've probably had opportunities to do other things in other locations. I don't know. I know you've got roots here outside of the Marquette ties and the Wisconsin ties, but
have I mentioned Marquette in this show? I haven't. No, and they are top 5, baby.
Yeah. But why St. Louis for so long? Just because it's home?
Yeah, well, I would say I wasn't pursuing other opportunities, and candidly, they weren't calling either. So,
well,
I think, when you, like in TV, and now it's changed because you can get to a, quote, big market much quicker. It used to be you would go to a really small town, then you'd go to hopefully a medium-sized town, and then if you were lucky, you got to a, quote, bigger market. So I worked in Flagstaff, Arizona, then Rhinelander, Wisconsin, both small markets. And then I worked in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a good medium-sized market. And my goal was if I could get to St. Louis. So that was a big thing for me. After I'd been here a couple of years, I got an email, I forget, or maybe it was a letter, I forget what level of communication. When I say I got a text, maybe it was an email from the Golf Channel and said, hey, can you send us a tape or whatever? And I was like, oh, I'm going to the Golf Channel, and then it didn't go anywhere. But I never pursued anything. And I don't know that there would have been opportunity. I wasn't trying to be the main sports guy in Chicago or New York, although those would be great jobs. There's one summer where I was offered to go to Fox Midwest. They were based in Pittsburgh, but I was young, single, and I was like, hey, I don't care. I'll do that. It's a really long story, but Fox 2 wouldn't allow it. And I was really mad because I was like third or fourth on the totem pole at the time. And I was like, listen, this is a great opportunity. I don't care if I move to Pittsburgh. Everybody will see me in St. Louis. But that's about the only time I think that I almost, quote, left. And at this point, I'm pretty rooted here. Family, of course. A lot of my cousins and, mom's here. My sister moved from Canada because her family was all up in Toronto. And then I had a kid. And she's like, okay, Martin's got roots and family. We're going to move there. So everybody's here. And it's the perfect size because you have all the sports you want, but you also have, the TV. Everybody makes fun of local TV, and it's an easy thing to do. But it really is something that I think still kind of connects the town. Like just think 2, 4, 5. Just say they don't exist. You just have all streaming. Well, when you wake up in the morning, you kind of want to know not just the weather, but like is the arch falling over? Is there a big fire over in Illinois? I see smoke. Does anybody know anything about it? And I realize people are getting their information in all different places now. I still think it has value, and I think especially on the sports side, if you go to a market like L.A., and we've seen this with the Rams, I mean, they have a hard time drawing a steady crowd in a population of 20, 30 million people, whereas in this town, they do care about the Blues. My mom's asking about Roman Berkey. I'm like, that's the goalie, Mom, for CDSC. Holy smokes. Where I think they still want to get their sports from people that they know or count on. And as far as going to news, and I joked with my boss, Spencer Koch was the GM for a long time at Fox 2. And we were all in a group meeting one time. And I think Savard had maybe just made the move. And Spencer said, boy, it's a lot of folks have done this. Rennie Knott moved over, Morning News, and then Savard and Bush. And Spencer said, have you thought about that, Martin? Has it ever crossed your mind? And I said, ooh, boy, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have enough credibility. And he goes, yeah, you're probably right. And I was like, hey, you're supposed to fight me on that point a little bit. I just think my sarcasm, it just wouldn't work. I'd have a hard time playing it straight. Yeah. And I just don't think it would work for me.
Fit and comfort is a thing. So
yeah, I don't think it would work for me. So why did I never leave? Because I was never offered anything somewhere. That's the short answer,
I'll take it.
People have been great, and nobody likes everything you do. There's plenty of people. My sister is married, but uses the Kilcoyne name as well as her married name. And she said every once in a while people say, oh, are you related? It's such a weird name, unless you're in Ireland, it's uncommon. And they'll say, are you related to Martin? And I always tell her, ask them why first. And my wife tries to say, if they say that, you go, why? Make sure that they don't hate me. But people have been largely supportive, and it's fun. If you grew up watching Cardinals and Mizzou games and all that, then it's, I covered Coconino East and Flagstaff at the big game, and Sonawa East and Flagstaff High, and all great teams and great games. I knew nothing about the history or the greatest player. You do these jobs in these other markets, and I could tell you a little bit about Rhinelander Hodeg's sports history, but not that much. So you cover it, and you get into it that one season or the 2 years you work there, but you don't have any depth of knowledge like you do in St. Louis, and so that I think that also comes in handy, when the station, Don Johnson was a great newsman in St. Louis, and he passed away last week. The station called, I was off work, and they said, hey, we really want to get Costas on because he and Don Johnson did Spirits basketball on the radio for 2 years, which was kind of a little known fact. So I reached out, and Bob's like, I would love to say a few words about Don, so I'm pretty connected to most anybody, I would say. And I always say, if I don't know somebody, I know somebody who does I can usually get to the right person.
Yeah.
So I think it's a comfort level at this point. But what Tony would say, don't be comfortable. Don't be comfortable. Can't be. Albert, never comfortable. Even when Tony, I heard he was sick, I texted him and said, hey, I hope you're okay, or what. I didn't know much, And he said, mending better. And I'm like, that's how he texts like he talks. He said, mending better. Yeah. He's exactly the same. Yeah. I'll give you one more, Tony, just because I've had so many segments and things with him. Well, I can tell you two things. Because I don't think I made this point properly earlier, is that despite how he came off on TV and people thought he was a stiff or he was a jerk or whatever, really loyal guy. Mm-hmm. And if he liked you, he liked you. But he was also fair. Like if he got mad at me or Derek Gould or anybody, the next day he treated you fine. He didn't. He really did turn the page. He believed in that. So if he screamed at you the next day, everything was fine. But it was Red Shandy's 90th birthday down at Mike Shannon's. We were lucky enough to be invited. So my mom and my wife go. My mom's like, oh, I really want to meet Tony. That's all she wanted. So we're there at the party. It turns out that was the night Stan passed away. And so the people in the know, I didn't know at that moment, it kind of cut into some of the celebratory stuff. And so I texted LaRussa and I said, hey, where are you? My mom wanted to meet you. He goes, you didn't want to see me? I'm like, no, my mom was. So he said, well, at Cafe Napoli, come on over. And I said, oh, okay, no worries. We're good, but thank you anyway. And I don't remember if he was a call or a text. In some of these stories, I get that part mixed up. But I remember 100%, whether it was text or call, he said, did I stutter? You're invited. Because I was like, it's not my place. To my point with Marshall, I don't want to hang out. He said, did I stutter? So I said, you guys want to go to Cafe Napoli? And we walk in, LaRussa's at a table, and Izzy is sitting there, Edmonds is sitting there, and they've got some bottles of wine, the stories are flying. And over in the corner, Jeff Fisher, who I knew because he was coaching the Rams, is interviewing Rob Ryan to be the defensive coordinator. I said, I wish Jerry Berger were alive. This is unbelievable. And whatever the wine was, I'm not a connoisseur. My wife said, this is the best wine I've ever tasted in my life. So it was on a social setting. Yeah. He wanted to include us. And I was trying to think of the other story. Making fun of him a little bit. After they won the 06 World Series, we're in there 2 days later. Players are cleaning out their locker room. I'm waiting for an end-of-season interview, but he's in his office holding court with Strauss and Bernie, and he loves sitting there talking to the writers for hours. I just kept sticking my head in there. I just kept saying, he goes, you looking for me? You want to do something? And I said, I got it. My photographer's got to go. And he said, okay, we'll do it now. But you got to do your impression of me for my family. His wife and two daughters are standing there. And I said, I really don't want to do this. You want to do the interview? You want to do the interview? I was like, do I really? He goes, yeah. You think you're so damn funny? Let's see it. So
he's holding you hostage.
And they're all sitting there, including
do the interview.
So I said, tied for first, legit, and it's a tough club over there, whatever. And his wife says, he says the same shit at home. No, she's laughing. And he goes, okay, you passed. And we went and did the interview. So I think that the fact that he has a sense of humor that people don't realize. And even in very recent, I did that interview where he talked about his cancer and he was coming back. And then I saw him that weekend. There was a dinner for people that are on the Hall of Fame ballot, the Cardinals Hall of Fame committee, whatever. He calls me over to his table. He goes, hey, that interview you did, there was a hot mic. And I said, what? Yeah, man, you thought we were done. It kept going. It kept recording. Because I sent him the audio. He asked for the audio. I said, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, it's just, you said goodbye, but then you called me a piece of shit. And I said, what? And now I'm freaked out for a minute. Did I? And then I realized he's messing with me.
Oh.
And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, you weren't supposed to hear that. And that was the end of it. So there's always a bit or whatever. He
plays ball.
He should have done morning radio.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Last thing before I let you go. Thank you for doing this so much, but
you're going to run out of tape as in the old days.
Right. I think I don't know if many people know this. I do. Valley guy. Used to work for the Valley, Missouri State. So I still Arch Madness, the whole thing. But I don't know if this is part of your 550 duties, but you also do play-by-play for Arch Madness games. I know you did some stuff.
I had the chance the last couple of years, yeah.
Is play-by-play something that you've been wanting to do? And how has that been? Do you like it? Because that's a little different ball game of preparation and things like that. But I mean, you seem pretty comfortable when you're doing play-by-play.
Well, it's I think every TV guy, if you watch the sports guy in Chicago or the sports lady in New York or LA or Des Moines, I guarantee they're all frustrated play-by-play people that wanted to do play-by-play, that think they can do play-by-play because everybody wants to be the voice of the team.
Sure.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I mean, Jack Buck was on the radio, and I wanted to be Jack Buck, like everybody did in so many different ways. So I've had the chance here and there. Rams preseason, tons of fun, but that was hard because because Joe Buck is gracious and he helped me with like my notes and preparation, the boards, like how you put them together, and he said it's impossible to do preseason football. I was like, well, thanks, Joe. I'm going to give it my best. He said, well, no. He said, they're going to play the 6th and 7th and 8th wide receiver on the team that you've never heard of. He said, you're going to study all week and have all these great notes about Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt. He goes, they'll be in khakis. Like, they won't even be on the field. And it was so true. I had so many notes prepared about, Marshall Faulk or Mark Bolger or whatever the team. And you didn't need any of that stuff. So I got to do that for a couple of years, and that was fun. I liked doing it. It's a different kind of adrenaline rush, too, being in there. The 550, it's been great last few years. I've done a couple of games. I would say I'm okay at it. TV and radio are different. Danny Mack and I have, because Dan is so good at play-by-play, and I joked with him. I filled in for him 1 year on the Missouri State high school games with Scott Highmark, and, we're on the headset, and I think it was even Poplar Bluff and Tyler Hansborough. It was a big-time matchup, but I'm saying ball swings to the left side over to the right on the wing, and the producer goes, they can see all this, so you have to remember radio versus TV, but it's fun to do it. I think I'm okay at that. I would say whatever the setting, I'm comfortable. Like I don't freak out, but I'm better at some stuff than others. And play-by-play, I'd say I'm okay.
Yeah, well, I enjoy it. Like I said, I know it's not your full-time thing, but as a familiar voice, let's say here's somebody.
It's fun, and I love the Valley, and it's such a great St. Louis weekend and experience, and 550's done a great job kind of embracing that.
Yeah.
So for those of you who've made it this far in, we'll be sending out gift cards, but also 550 KTRS 6 to 7 p.m. on a nightly basis. And just by way of example, when we're taping this, tonight's show, Ross Chaffetz, who his dad is Dr. Chaffetz, they have a pickleball team in St. Louis that he's always like, you got to cover some. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. He's on the show. We'll talk about a gazillion different things. There was talk that the Chaffetz might bring an NBA team at some point. I don't know that that'll ever happen, but we'll go in a lot of different directions. And then my other guest tonight is Jack Jackson, who was a colonel in Vietnam. He's a St. Louis guy. He ended up, I think he was a state senator. He may have had a show at KTRS, which doesn't limit the field. There was a lot of people that did that. But we're talking about his Vietnam experience and the importance of the U.S. military in this current world because there's so much drama around the globe. So that's my goal on a nightly basis, to kind of go in a lot of different directions. Then later in the week, Big Walt, of course, for some nonsense.
Nice. And Scoops with Danny Mac too?
Scoops, well, we do Great Talk. That's every Monday. We have gotten a lot of good feedback off of that.
I love Great Talk. It's one of my go-tos.
We kind of harass each other. I do try and have topics, but I have more fun. I mean, again, we don't really need to break down the Mizzou-Georgia game. I'd rather hear Dan do his John Miller imitation, to be honest with you. But yeah, we have fun with that. So Great Talk. A lot of the Tony Talks, all that stuff lives on Spotify, iTunes, and those LaRussa segments, I think, mostly still have value because there are a lot of deep dives into when Albert first arrived, when McGuire had his home run race. And so feel free to peruse the Kilcoyne catalog, although this should fill you up for a while.
Yeah. And Martin's pretty active on the social media, so even responds to the unruly fan every once in a while that's got a smart ass comment here.
Yeah, well, if it's in fun, I'll respond. I've always said this, like if somebody like has an opinion, like they hated that segment or hated me or thought it was stupid, I don't argue their opinion. But if somebody factually is wrong, like, hey, you said Molina was going to be the manager next year, I will correct and say, I didn't say that. Like if they get facts wrong, I will chime in. But for the most part, I try not to weigh in, especially an opinion. If somebody says that was stupid, I'm not going to convince them otherwise. Or they say you're an idiot, I'm not going to convince them otherwise. So As long as they get the facts right, I'm good.
Is Molina going to be on the Cardinal staff?
What I reported from the outset is that he called the meeting with them. He met with them and said, I want to be on the staff. Everybody immediately said, oh, he'll come to spring training. Oh, he doesn't want to do that. And what I'm telling you is he does want to do that. My understanding was he wanted to be the bench coach. Now, Mazzelka said, we're not changing the staff. He said that this week. But he said, we'll be adding on. Is there such a thing as an assistant bench coach? I don't know, but
they can do whatever they want.
But I fully believe Molina will be in the dugout next to Ollie all year. And people say, well, why would he want to do this? He's got all that money. I said, I'm not telling you why. I'm just telling you he wants to.
Right.
I wouldn't want to do it. If I were him, I wouldn't want to do it. But what we know about Molina, and I tried to convey this, he thinks it's like his job to pass along this knowledge. Like he thinks about baseball in a way most of us don't. That we would be on a yacht somewhere counting our money.
Sure.
He wants to do this. He wants to be a big league manager. And so there were some debates on there. People like, oh, well, he's not going to do it. I said, I'm telling you, he wants to do this. And the Cardinals are not in a position to say no, coming off a last place finish with a inexperienced manager. I like Ollie, but he's inexperienced.
Right.
And if you can add a guy next to him and you got a quiet clubhouse, do you think if Tyler O'Neill has a tight back and is a late scratch in Philly on a Tuesday night, I think Yachty's going to go and say, hey, what's going on, pal? You're not playing tonight? You going to play tomorrow? Like, I think they need that kind of edge. So it's my understanding he is going to be on the staff. I thought he'd be the bench coach, and I realize that's unfair to Joe McEwing, who had that job, but that was my understanding. Maybe it's shifted a little bit. Maybe he's the assistant. I'd be shocked if he's not in a role on a daily basis.
All right. I'm going to end it right there. That's a good tidbit for me to close. I've never had that kind of a newsy item.
Okay. My podcast, well, I hope it's true. I hope this stays evergreen years later.
All right. I appreciate this, sir. Thanks so much, man. This has been great.
I love D-Bear. It's always great to sit and talk with the great Derek Dock.
Martin Kilcoyne, Persons of Interest. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Persons of Interest. This podcast is a personal project with the goal of sharing stories that might inspire others to create their own path. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a guest suggestion, you can reach Derek on social media at DDocket. Thank you for listening to Persons of Interest.